I'd like to welcome everyone to the CleanStart Perspectives today. We have an exciting discussion about where you can find additional sources of capital and also what you need to really do to prepare yourself to get them. First, I want to recognize who brings us this program today. It's supported by SMUD, Chico Start, Fresno State, the Wet Center down there, Witten Law, Baker Tilly, and River City Bank, who's also a guest today. All of these groups have come together to support early stage entrepreneurs in the greater Central Valley, helping them to accelerate technologies right here in our region, delivering economic growth and accelerating the energy transition. I think I used accelerate too many times there, but we're going to keep going. Now it's my pleasure to welcome our three guests today on our panel, Tamara, George, and Rosa. Now let me give them some quick introductions. Rosa is from River City Bank. She is the Senior Vice President and Director of Clean Energy and Public Sector Banking there. She leads efforts to finance renewable energy and sustainability projects across California. With a deep understanding of how to structure innovative financial solutions, Rosa helps bridge the gap between visionary clean tech projects and the capital needed to bring them to life. River City Bank has become one of the leading regional partners supporting clean energy development and climate smart infrastructure. George McDaniel is from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, part of their climate tech finance program. He's actually the climate tech finance lead for them. He works directly with entrepreneurs and lenders through the climate tech finance program, a groundbreaking initiative that provides loan guarantees and technical assistance to help early stage climate tech companies scale and commercialize. George's mission is to make access to capital simpler and more equitable for innovators solving our most pressing environmental challenges. Tamara Cohn is also from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, part of the Climate Tech Finance team, and she is overseeing the program's primary financial investment strategy and partnerships. Is that correct, Tamara? With a focus on accelerating the development of clean technologies as well. She helps align public financing tools with private sector capital to reduce risks and speed up real-world climate solutions. Work demonstrates how smart collaboration between government and finance can unlock transformative impact for communities and the planet. So I'd like to welcome them here to be our guests. I'm going to spotlight them all so we can have a discussion along with Gary, the co-founder of CleanStart, to be my co-host on this. So spotlight. Every time I spotlight someone, it moves them around. All right. Now, first off, my first question is can you kind of explain, I guess, so California has made these financial development corporations to help businesses get loans and grow in California. And there's a special portion of them called, I guess, climate lenders. So I was hoping that, Rosa could explain, what a climate lender is in California and then the relationship and how you guys work with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District on that.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And thanks everyone for joining. It's a pleasure to be here and good to be in good company. I've worked a lot with George and Tamara over the years, and so you'll get to learn a little bit more about that here today. I'd say, a lender is a lender, and each lender has their specific niche. River City Bank happens to have a clean energy division, and so we have a particular set of expertise where we focus on providing capital to clean energy related companies. We started that initiative back in 2018, and really that was on the heels of success that we had in working with quasi-government agencies called community choice aggregators, or CCAs, that are load serving entities here of electricity here in California. And so that sort of is what catapulted us into being a quote unquote, I think what you guys are categorizing as a climate lender. Ultimately, credit is credit. And the different niches that certain banks have, whether that's climate, healthcare, any other vertical, comes down to the expertise that the underwriters of the bank have accumulated over time, and the mission of the bank in terms of what their quote unquote credit box is, and in terms of what we will finance and what we won't. And so I think that's really what distinguishes us from others out there. I think when it comes to climate related projects, which is a very broad umbrella to be fair. There's a lot of different types of projects, a lot of different types of companies that fall into that. It is a little bit more complex than just financing your, mom and pop small business in the community, because there are other types of risks that you need to vet in terms of, the technology risks associated with that particular project. If it's an energy project, there's, additional risks associated with pricing and contracts. It's very contractually heavy, especially when we're talking about project finance. And so that's where the differentiation between lenders really comes into play. You want to work with somebody that understands the risks and understands how to structure around them. And so that's where and I think that's kind of a key differentiation that I can think of, on the spot. So I'll turn it back to you, Tom.
Well, yeah, I think that's, you're an early stage company. You have these grand ideas of what you're going to be becoming. And then someone says, you have to get all these contracts in line and all these agreements. Like you guys have financed a lot of clean energy infrastructure, Rosa, and a lot of those they have to have a PPA or certain contracts to prove that they're going to have revenue. And I think that's a key portion that things that you look at is what their revenue is, right? Or
Exactly.
the yeah, and their business plan. You've mentioned that to me a couple of times. If they have a business plan that makes sense. So a company has, this brilliant idea, this cool idea, but they're maybe not good at penning pen to paper. They come to CleanStart. We're like, all right, we're going to go do some customer validation and some testing of your idea here, and then it's like, okay, we want to try to get finance. Well, then I would go and introduce them to Climate Tech Finance, who would hopefully get that company ready to work with River City Bank. Now, Tamara or George, if I introduced a company to you that they've had a small scale validation project, how would you get them ready to get some of this financing?
Yeah, I can start on that. And again, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure. So first step to work with Climate Tech Finance program is to fill out our intake form on our website, and I'll share the resources later after the meeting with everyone. And we conduct the intake call to confirm that the technology indeed reduces greenhouse gas emissions directly or indirectly. And we also confirmed that the technology is past the demonstration phase. In this case, it's been deployed under real life conditions. And then it kind of checks. And another very important distinction is a small business, which majority of the companies are small businesses. And they will be deploying their project in the state of California for our program. So the company doesn't have to be headquartered here, but the proceeds of the loan should be spent within the state. So if it kind of checks this pretty easy qualifications, we go to the next step of sharing the preliminary financial review questions and share with the company, which company then submit back to our finance leads. George is here on the call, and we have another finance lead, John. And that kind of starts that financial due diligence, because again, we have no doubt the technology fits, but we want to confirm that they're in the right stage to actually receive the loan with a loan guarantee. So the role of our finance leads is crucial in our program. And George, if you want to share more what it's actually the magic behind the closed doors.
The magic. You and Rosa have talked about all the things that really matter. And what we do is both John and I, highly experienced bankers, lenders, etc. And as a result, we think like bankers. And that is incredibly important in assisting most small businesses, because survey after survey has shown that most small businesses, whether climate or not, only think about money about 5 minutes before they need it. That's the nature of small business. And what we do, we translate in effect. We take the financials that we are given, we assess the strengths and weaknesses in those. And with that, we determine which of the lenders we work with, and River City is obviously at the very top of our list. We determine where this particular borrower might fit in terms of their financial qualifications, all of the financial ponderables, I think I just created a word, that are necessary do you have runway capital? Meaning, do you have sufficient working capital to last a while these contracts come into play? Do you have sufficient customer demand as shown, as suggested by both of you and Rosa? Do you have sufficient customer demand to make this a viable enterprise if you are able to secure the capital that we're talking about? With these factors in play, then the question becomes, are you qualified? Do you have experience in this particular vertical space? Do you have experience that would make a classic lender comfortable that you can succeed at this task if given these resources? If we feel that the answers are yes, we are all behind this. And if we feel the answers are maybe, we don't just say no. We want to explore this more deeply because the whole purpose of the guarantee program is to assist small businesses that need access to capital to survive and succeed. So we, at the end of the day, that borrower, excuse me, that borrower will have either a yes, they will have a pathway to a yes, because both are incredibly important to the achievement of the objectives of the guarantee program. And the objectives of the guarantee program generally are access to capital for small businesses that are deserving of same and need it, and the improvement of quality of life for every citizen of the state of California. And that goes back to the inception of the program, and most especially in the case of climate tech. As the governor has said, we need to accelerate the progress here in order to really improve the quality of life for all Californians, and in fact, on a global basis. I'm talking too much, so I'll be quiet now.
Well, I really appreciate that because, I like the approach of taking the energy transition, not just as a transition of our energy, but a transition of our economic systems and an opportunity to, bring, I guess, access to people that have typically been overlooked. Now, because through the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, people might be saying, why are you talking in Sacramento? We have the great Sacramento Air Quality Management District, which is just as much a mouthful as your guys' organization, because it's Sacramento Metro Air Quality Management District. But your loan program is part of how you guys have, I believe, chosen to use a portion of your SB 32 funds from the cap and trade. Or correct me if I'm wrong. I see Tamara.
No, actually, I can. So we
Tell me
started.
how it came into being.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So the program started really as a pilot between the Bay Area and in 2018. So the Air District wanted to be more involved in the climate space, considering a lot of innovation come from Silicon Valley and other areas. As a government agency, sometimes we were the last to find out about them, which is not surprising. But we wanted to obviously expedite the acceleration and adoption of those technologies. And we look for different financial mechanisms that could work. Grant funding is the one that most government agencies are more experienced, but it requires a lot of admin costs. It requires quite a longer process, and also could be sometimes burdensome on companies as well in terms of reporting. So we looked for other tools and came across the iBank's loan guarantee, which they've had, George, since the 80s, right? I believe.
1968.
68. Okay. Pretty helping small businesses in the state of California. So we partnered with iBank just on the climate technologies. And we worked just within our 9 Bay Area counties from 20, I would say really kind of took off in 2020, in early 2020, right in the middle of pandemic. We actually had the first loan with River City closed that year. And we worked just with the companies that either deploy in the Bay Area or headquartered in the Bay Area. And as you can imagine, it was pretty complex saying to the company just outside, a mile outside of our jurisdiction, that sorry, what you do matters, but you can't fit in our program. And in 2022, iBank received more funding from Biden, a second tranche of SSBCI funding. and they wanted to expand the program statewide to kind of create more movement in the climate space. And we, as an air district, conducted a series of different workshops. We have to kind of talk with other air districts, sharing about our program, see if there is interest. And while there was some interest, none of the air districts really had resources to do it. So they let us run the program statewide. So since 2022, we've been working statewide. But yes, me and the team of other two staff within the Bay Area Air District, and we have finance leads who are George and John, our consultants.
So, yeah, so I have a kind of question for Rose on this is that traditionally before this, a lot of the stuff that I'd saw, River City Bank go and engage with was like larger utility scale projects. How has working with Climate Tech Finance on these, I guess, more emerging technologies, how have you seen that as like a benefit or a opportunity for River City Bank? And has there been any good success stories?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think maybe I can just rewind and for those on the call or watching the recording that aren't familiar with how the guarantee
We
program
are live now,
works.
by the way. So
Yeah, perfect. I get questions on this all the time. So in the event of somebody having this question already burning, the banks, especially I'd say local community banks, benefit a lot from loan guarantee programs sponsored by the state or the government. In this case, there's the partnership with the California Infrastructure Bank, which is, referred to as the iBank, and then the Climate Tech Finance Program, which is where Tamara and George come from with their two different organizations. How the bank benefits from the loan guarantee program is that it's called a loss share guarantee. And that's an important distinction because sometimes I get calls from folks that think that this is sort of like a grant or like free money from the government. It's really not. The banks are deploying 100% of their own capital, so you still have to qualify under the bank's underwriting requirements. But the loan guarantee is a loss share where in certain cases will cover up to 80%. For climate tech, it'll cover up to 90% of the loan amount in case there is a loss. So what that means, and it's up to 5 million now, right? That's still
Yes.
so up to 5 million. So if there is a loan that River City Bank makes to a company that is qualified under the Climate Tech Guarantee Program, and we have a 90% guarantee, and worst case scenario happens, the bank would still have to go through all their normal liquidation scenarios, trying to collect as much of the funds back. And then whatever the loss is at the end, the bank splits that with the guarantee program, which takes 90% of the hit and the bank takes 10%. So it reduces the dollar amount of the exposure for the bank. And so I think that's a really important distinction because sometimes, like I mentioned, this is kind of looked at as free money, which it's not. And I'd say the best qualified candidates that we've worked with and deals that we've closed on are what we call borderline loans, where you're almost qualified for a traditional commercial loan, but there's like some risk that's associated with the credit profile that's somewhat unmitigated, whether that's, we really would only do this loan if we get personal guarantees from the owners. The owners have put all their money into this company and they don't have any assets outside. And so the guarantee that they would provide is really not, providing any additional credit strength. That's a perfect example of where the climate tech guarantee program can come into play and sort of augment that risk. And so that's really where we see the benefit of these sort of, borderline applications. And I say this all the time to clients, especially ones where we're using the funds more for operating business and not for project related finance, is, I look at this program as training wheels. We underwrite the loan, maybe it's a line of credit for a year, and we see how the borrower does. And then hopefully after the year or a couple of years into it, the bank gets comfortable enough with that credit where we don't need the guarantee anymore. And so that's really the end goal, is to, kind of use this as training wheels and then get the borrower to a point where they're really considered, bank qualified effectively. And then to your question, Thomas, so this particular loan guarantee program maxes out at 5 million. And so we're definitely looking at smaller opportunities. And so if it's 5 million, our maximum loan amount is, 6.25. Effectively, we're working on one deal right now, which is going to close by year end. That's exactly that loan amount.
Would.
And we've looked at this, like just to reiterate my earlier comments, is really kind of an opportunity where the bank wouldn't have been able to do the loan without the guarantee. And so that's a really important distinction. I don't think George or Tamara really want to work with banks that would have done the deal anyway, and they just want to slap on the guarantee because it reduces their risk. We really look at this like, hey, this is something that we need in order to get to that next step. And so I think that's a really good example of how we've used the guarantee program. We haven't used it particularly for project-related finance, which I think was really your question. And that's primarily because of the sizing. Project financing tends to be a little bit larger dollars, typically, higher than 5 million, up to 10 million. And, there's just not been an opportunity. We've looked at a few deals, George knows we've looked at a few things, but there hasn't been a good example where I could say, this project wouldn't have happened without the guarantee. I hope that there will be, maybe after this call.
And,
Excuse me on that.
and I have, sorry, a minor correction, Rosa. When we started, we were 90% just the Bay Area.
Oh, yes. Now we're
Yes.
80.
And
Sorry.
now since we went statewide, because we used district funds for additional 10%, now being statewide, we no longer use district funds to supplement that 10%. So now we 80% across the whole state.
And
Just-
I don't want to I don't think you should downplay how important that is. Many of you know I love like the history of banking and finance and how it's actually helped us develop some of the, the greatest parts of, America, and being able to use that as a tool for accelerating and building, clean tech finance and accelerating the energy transition. It's a giant key to unlock a whole bunch of money that would not be available any other way. And now, so you've had a couple companies that I've seen in your kind of portfolio that have footprints also in Sacramento, like EV Life and Sparks. And you mentioned it not being project financing on it. So so it's typically operational money that they're looking at doing for it. That seems a
Yeah.
lot more typically risky than, the
It,
project.
it is, yeah. So all of the examples where we've used the Climate Tech Guarantee Program, it's been typically revolving lines of credit for operating funds. And these are companies that are later stage startups and almost really not a startup anymore because they've had some sort of track record. They're revenue positive. They have, generated some profits, and they really need some additional capital to kind of grow to get to the next stage. That's really the key. I talk to a lot of, great entrepreneurs that have brilliant ideas, but they haven't generated revenue yet. That's not a good fit for the program, and they really need to go into the private equity or the venture capital market. And so this is really, later stage startups. Almost you're not really considered a startup anymore. You're kind of, this is what you need to get out of the startup bucket effectively. That's kind of how I look at it. George,
Okay.
I don't know if there's any other examples you have there.
I've got a question that I think all of you are going to chime in on this. So yeah, you mentioned, companies that they're really early stage. All right, they go out and we encourage them to make this kind of like wireframe prototype. And if they can sell the prototype, that's great. They go out and sell something because it's validation for what they do. Now they go out and they sell this wireframe prototype. They may have lost money on it, or maybe they made a ridiculous amount of money on it because they didn't realize the value that they had, but it's not really clear in their books the ROI on that specific thing that they did. But they have revenue now. How do they go from this kind of stage of like, I have revenue that isn't clearly well defined with a product that's not my final product, it's, my minimally viable product, to something that, would open up the door of this kind of financing, or would that potentially open the door for this financing? Just getting that kind of first set of sales with a product that's not quite finished out there. And hopefully they'll come and talk to all of us about how they can do better bookkeeping, but might not have that yet. How do they draw the line to that, and what, your Rosa and River City Bank have with the iBank here?
Yeah, so that still sounds pretty early stage. And this is where I'm going to
Right.
bring up Thomas's favorite word, a business plan up again. Is that's the brilliance between, working with entrepreneurs is they've got all these ideas and sometimes, like you mentioned, the idea that they have manifests into something different that's also profitable. But in order to, and I'll state this in a way that, maybe the listeners can understand. Private equity and venture capital, they're all about taking, maximum amount of risk for the highest return. And so they can take risk and if 20 companies they invest in, if 19 of them fail and one makes it to be the next Facebook or the next Amazon, they've made it big. Banks, the only upside we have is the interest rate we charge. And so we don't make extra money if your company makes more money. And so usually when I explain this, it clicks for people to understand kind of the risk appetite that a bank has versus a private equity or a venture capital investor. And so banks are always going to be looking for de-risking, and we have to be right 99.9% of the time or we're out of business. And so that's just kind of how the commercial banking works. There's other types of lenders out there that are, private lenders that may take a little bit more risk. You just pay a little bit more for it. And so that's where a loan guarantee program like this really helps banks get over that hurdle, because I would probably say the company that you described, Thomas, maybe the next stage is now they've figured out their product and now they need to go sell that and they need to generate, enough revenue to cover their costs and show that they can be profitable. That's when it would be a good time for us to have a conversation.
So on what I kind of have on that is one, first off, whose money are the banks lending? The
Depositor.
You're a
which is
depositor.
ours.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you
So.
for respecting that a little bit very well.
Yeah.
But like, so I'm also thinking on like, how do they explain that? Okay, maybe I'm not profitable right now, but that's because I can't maybe buy the capital equipment that I need. Maybe because I don't have the funds to, reach the economies of scale that can really, really bring me in that revenue. But I can show it at this price point. And we've had people come in and talk about how, through perfect financial modeling, you can show that direct line. But is there anything that, you look for, or that at River City Bank, or that, George or Tamara, you guys are like, hey, you guys need to go talk and work on this to show that you can go from this level of revenue or profit margin, or get to a profit margin that makes sense?
That's all part of the process, Thomas.
Hmm.
That's part of what we do. We've sat at more than one kitchen table with the entrepreneur and said, did it take you to get to this point? And what volume did you, how many, what amount of investment went into getting here? And if you expand that by 10 times, which is not unusual when you're at the early stages, if you expand that sales volume by 10 times, what are the costs that are associated with that? 99% of entrepreneurs will be able to tell you that right off the top. Then it's in today's world, Excel solves a whole lot of sense because you can simulate just about any sort of scenario based upon applying common sense principles to these streams of numbers. This is not rocket science. It's just taking that entrepreneur's knowledge and experience and then using it in a common sense fashion, using Excel or other methodologies. In today's world, you could probably just have an AI model answer all those questions for you, but then you've got to double check what the AI model did just to be certain. But that is essential. That's a major part of what we do in terms of assessing the likelihood of success of that entrepreneur's dreams.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say probably, George, half, if not more, of your conversations end up with the email that once you get to XYZ, then come back and talk to us.
Yeah, everybody gets a plan.
Well, that is a direction for everybody. That's with entrepreneurs coming in being like, I'm going to do everything. I have a new solar panel that's also going to replace Facebook. Getting them focused on that, okay, what's going to drive your first revenue? What does your first customer really want? Really important. Now, CleanStart here, we work with banks like River City Bank and try to make connections for them. Climate Tech works a lot closer with you guys on helping them getting ready for that investment sort of thing on there. So I'm going to ask Rosa, if you had advice for, CleanStart or for Climate Tech Finance about what's one thing you wish people that we brought you had a little bit more knowledge about, putting you kind of on the spot on this, what would it be? What's one thing where you're like, okay, if you could just inoculate them with this one question, and if it's clearly explain your revenue today, not tomorrow, might be it. But yeah, do you have?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I would say probably the best advice that I could give to anybody that is in the process of seeking capital, whether that's from traditional lenders or private equity, is have have a good executive summary of what your company does, what's your revenue stream, what makes you different, and how are you going to repay the loan. Lenders care about one thing: sources of repayment. How are you going to repay me? And so that's always what we're gonna focus on. Sometimes, and I say this tongue in cheek because I really respect the entrepreneur and kind of the vision mindset that entrepreneurs have to have. Sometimes they need to come, to the ground a little bit and just explain kind of, how, like, don't spend all your time talking about how amazing your product or service is going to be. I think that's all important, but you could do that in a short summary. Talk about why it's important, how you're going to make money, and then more importantly, how you're going to repay the bank or how you're going to repay your investors if it's a equity pitch. I think sometimes we get lost in the details of all the different things, and it gets to a point where it may get frustrating for a lender, and they're just going to tell you no because they don't understand your business model. And so that's where, that executive summary or like a more detailed business plan as well, if you get to that later stage, is going to save you a lot of headache and a lot of phone calls, because it's clear, your vision is written down, and you can tweak it, after questions come up from the lender or the underwriter. But I'd say it's way more important to me than getting a fancy Excel spreadsheet with projections, because my experience, projections are always wrong. It just depends on which direction they're wrong. And so, we kind of want to focus on the high level summary, at least initially, and then we can kind of dig into the details.
Thomas, I'd like to add on to what Rosa said. That is incredibly important. I think it was Mark Twain who said, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. The
Yeah.
executive summary, if you can summarize your technology, your dreams, your expectations, and your needs in a one-pager, 3-4 paragraphs, you will be ahead of 80 to 90% of the folks who come into a lender asking for a loan. It's literally that simple, because you spend 30 minutes, which could have been summarized in a 5-minute discussion. And when you make the lender's life easier, you make the likelihood of success much greater.
I think that's something we can all aspire to, if you're making your customers, your lender, your partner, a stakeholder that you're working with life easier and understanding what you're doing. I'm gonna quote, it's one of the first people who worked with me in entrepreneurship when I gave him an idea for that I had for a financial product with it all listed out of how it was all going to work. He was going to say, I'm not going to say you have no idea what you're talking about, but I have no idea what you're talking about. So, you know, keep it simple, smarty, kiss. I think everyone can appreciate that. Now, Gary, I know you, like George, you're probably one of the only ones who remembers 1968 and have had a great deal of experience in this area. Do you have any comments or questions for our panel?
Well, I'm burning to get to the question operationally. What's your portfolio look like? I mean, have you done a lot of these loans? Are we at the early stages? What's your experience been? I don't know. I mean, things go through cycles here, so I don't know what the default rate might have been. We actually had to call on the guarantee, but business wise, how
Mhm.
how are you working out? Have you had a very successful, set of years in making these guarantees and proving that this is something that works?
By virtually every objective measure, yes, we have. At this point, we're right at 50 million dispersed in deals. And we've done 23, 24 deals. We've got another 50 or 60 that are pre-approved in the pipeline that we're working to. We've had one loss. That loss was 500 grand. And it was the entrepreneur came back to me 6 months later and said, I wish I had listened to you and not thrown in the towel so quickly, because this is new, a whole new vertical space, whole new industry is developing before our eyes. And it's not because we're all that brilliant, quite the contrary. We just worked very hard at understanding the borrower, the technology to the extent we can, and the combination of skill sets brought to the table, both financial with John and myself, and with the technical skill set by the scientist team at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. These, as long as you're, again, applying common sense principles and willing to sit down and do the work, you should succeed virtually all of the time. Most folks just don't have the time to take the time to be as exacting as we have been thus far. Does that kind of address it?
It certainly does. I mean, and congratulations on having that kind of track record. And Rosa, from the point of view of the bank,
Mhm.
is the energy division doing well? Is this something that has proven itself as being a good engine for achieving the bank's objectives?
Yeah, we've done a handful of deals through the program. Knock on wood, we've not taken a loss. So I'm going to keep that track record. And, I'd say it's not a huge part of our growth in terms of dollars, but I do think that it is meaningful because we don't know yet. It's still early stages. One of these companies could become very large and really kind of make up for, that initial investment that we decided to approve. And so, yeah, so I'm still hopeful that we can do more, and I'm watching all these companies closely. And one thing, George knows this because we talk a lot when he's got prospective borrowers that are in his pipeline, is I love to get updates from companies. I don't my approach is not just to say no, thank you, next. I want to know, hey, this was interesting, you know, 6 months from now, a year from now, did you actually achieve the things that we talked about? Were you able to raise additional capital? Were you able to hit the sales goals that you were, projecting? Because, I always like to keep that door open. And, I think it's important, if I can help a company with some sound advice from a banker, even if I don't end up helping them down the road, I've done something good, because hopefully that helps them, because it's not knowledge that is taught in schools. It's not knowledge that people that are very technical, like engineers, they don't necessarily have the knowledge about how financial markets work, or entrepreneurs, they may have, a lot of knowledge in their specific area. And so, wherever we can help educate people and do check-ins, I think that's also a success of the program.
So, I mean, there are various things that have been tried to fill a gap on the lending side. Venture lending was popular at one point, a characteristic of which is you did the loan, an appropriate interest rate, but then you took warrants in the company. Is that
Mhm.
something that's been considered by either Climate Tech Finance or the bank going forward?
In the case of climate tech finance, it has been seriously considered. John and I both have professional background in it, and we have done deals that could be conveyed as that. We're very careful about the predatory aspect here, because it is incredibly important for us to make certain that the working capital for the company is not depleted by predatory interest rates. But yet conceptually, absolutely, and we've done a few deals that have that appearance, and we're very open to that going forward, because in the end, we're about the end product. The end product is a growing business, as for instance, that first deal that Rosa gifted us with, and thank you again. That company, 5 years later, is over 5 times the revenue size that it was in the beginning, and employs, good Lord, 7 or 8 times the number of people, because job creation is incredible. Sustainable job creation is an incredibly important part of our objective as well. So again, I'm talking too much, but we're pretty proud of what we've done so far.
Yeah, as you should be. Rosa, what's your view on taking warrants or some kind of position beyond being just a lender in companies?
Yeah, that's beyond the scope of what our underwriting criteria is, because we're more of a, traditional commercial bank. That I know, taking warrants and sort of doing more venture debt type of structure is a fit for some lenders, but it's usually non-bank lenders, because it is considered a little bit more risky. And as Thomas pointed out, banks have to be prudent in the loans they make, because we are lending out our depositors money at the end of the day. And so that's not something that we've done. Not necessarily something that we wouldn't do if it was on the table. It's just not our program at present.
And Gary, I'd like to just add one thing there. I'm the classic banker, and part of that is we still live in a financial system that is the gold standard globally to this point, despite fractures along the way. A major part of that is the safety that the depositor feels through the FDIC, full faith and credit of the U.S. government involved, et cetera, et cetera. There's a price we pay, and that price is continued diligence. Doesn't mean that we cannot stretch risk management parameters appropriately at times to advance the societal good, but we've got to be very careful, because the regulatory framework calls for the diligence that it calls for. Rose, I apologize for stepping into your realm there.
No, you've got relevant experience in that space.
It also gives, that structure you're talking about, those gears that you're talking about, gives the opportunity for, governments like California to step in and take on, little things for the benefit of society.
Exactly.
So that's why I think in us it's an appropriate use to apply it for climate tech, because it is not just a good for the company and the economy. It's a societal good, which has positive externalities. Things that I absolutely love to talk about. But I want to, as before we wrap it up, I want to throw to see if there's anyone who might have a question in the audience. Just throw your question into the chat or raise your hand.
While we're waiting for that, I like the fact that Thomas, that he put us in the category of fossils that we can remember 1968, George. You used the word classic, so I'll adopt that. Yeah, you and I are classics. Much more positive context. ARB and your relationship to the ARB, they've moved from calling it cap and trade to cap and invest, which is provocative as to what they're willing to do with the money from that program. Any conversations going on how cap and invest might do some of the things that the Biden administration had been doing in putting pots of money out there for you to use?
In our case, we absolutely have aspirations as to how that capital can be used. I've been following cap and trade before cap and trade had a name. And the reality is the resources needed are almost incalculable here in terms of what is needed both in California and globally. Thank God we live in California, where we have leadership that is finely attuned to those needs and is doing everything they can to serve the need of the public in that respect. So I can only say that we really look forward to the innovative uses of that capital applied to the most pressing societal needs. And climate tech is high on that list of priorities in terms of societal need, not just jobs and affordable housing, but also the environment we live in and the productivity of that environment. The Central Valley is still either the first or second most fertile large block of land on the planet Earth, second only to the Nile River Valley at times.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm a farm boy.
I couldn't tell.
Well,
So, at any rate, thank you very much for your presentation this morning. And Thomas, did we get any questions from any of the audience out there?
I don't see any, but I feel like if they do have ones, they can follow up with you guys by going to ctf.baaqmd.gov. You can check out River City Bank's clean energy financing. I put the link to that in the chat there. You can reach us out to us for connections to any of the folks here today. And I enjoyed this discussion a lot. We'll have an edited version back up on YouTube and on LinkedIn for people to check out. And I love the financing and all the stuff that kind of goes with it because it helps accelerate and build, the world that we want. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and read us out. I want to thank our panelists today for having an engaging discussion with us. I want to thank Climate Tech Finance Bay Area Air District and River City Bank for lending us the time of Rosa, George, and Tamara to talk today. I also want to say, 2 days ago, 3 days ago was Veterans Day. So thank you to all the veterans out there and for your service, along with thank you for our supporters. That's, SMUD, Chico Start, Fresno State, Witten Law, Baker Tilly, and River City Bank. If you want to check out something about Chico Start, we just put up some blogs about the recent Grow Tech Fest. It was exciting. It was at the Sierra Nevada Brewery. It was great. I encourage everyone to check it out next year. And also check out, really go in and go through Climate Tech Finance's website and the different iBank websites. There's a whole bunch of resources in there. I also in the chat threw out the link to the California Capital, but it's the FDC that's located in the Sacramento area. They all work together. They're all part of a general thing to help us grow and accelerate California in today's economy. And I want to highlight upcoming events. On the second, we have automating clean energy AI incentives with Resolve. Also, the holiday party for startups that will be at Urban Hive. And one thing that's not here, but I also want to remind people of is next week is Global Entrepreneurship Week. So if you go on Luma and look up the Carlson Center, you can see all the events for Global Entrepreneurship Week. Make it out to ours. That's on the 20th. Hope to see you there. And thank you all for attending. Looking forward to seeing you guys in the future. All right. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody who participated.
Thank you all.